I'm sorry. I'm not the kind of person who's going to try and sweep it under the rug either. I mean, after all, it was out there on everybody's podcast last week for everyone to hear. Not going to put it aside. Putting this episode after the first original episode of The Cage. Fantastic idea. I'm excited to talk about it. So here we go. Welcome to the Brothers Trek About. My name is Matt. Coming to you from Austin and coming to you from Planet Houston is my brother Ken. Say hello, Ken.
Live long and prosper.
That's right. I loved this episode. I loved its tie into The Cage. I love that they used the previously on Star Trek. I thought that was amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That was great. And especially great for you, who did actually take the time to watch that episode again.
I have watched The Cage and the Menagerie in preparation for...
Oh.
Well,
good. If I have any questions, I'm coming to you. One thing I do want to talk about real quick before we jump into this, because it's also appropriate for this episode and also kind of appropriate for everything else that's going on in pop culture and, maybe even politically too, though I'm not going to get too much into that. I was listening to a podcast called Star Wars Minute. It's one of my favorite ones. And their guest host, now, not one of them, but one of their guest hosts, was talking about the idea of nostalgia, right? And specifically, he was talking about The Last Jedi and what that did and what nostalgia did to sort of curb the brilliance of it, right? Because the biggest complaint about that movie is it's like, I can't believe what you did to my hero, Luke Skywalker. And again, me as a Star Wars fan, I'm like, I walked out of that movie going, I was blown away by that thing. I can't believe it. Wow, that was just something, I can't wait to go see it again tomorrow to really take it all in the second time. I didn't walk out blown away. I mean, I was blown away they killed Luke Skywalker, but I wasn't like, oh my gosh, you ruined everything of my life, So I thought that was a really interesting point that he made.
Were people pissed off that he died?
People were pissed off that he died, yes, because in the next movie, then he won't be able to do whatever it is that they wanted him to do in this movie.
Except that's not true. It should be clear that he is the Obi-Wan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Obi-Wan died at the end of the second act in the first movie.
Yeah.
I mean, you should have just known going in, well, Luke's the Obi-Wan. I guess, he's going to die at the end of Act 2.
But what people were more pissed about is that they feel like his turn of feeling like out of it, walking away from, the Jedi and the Jedi Order and the Force and everything. They felt like that was an even bigger travesty than even him dying.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I'm not thrilled by it.
Yeah.
But, I don't expect a movie that I go to see to be like, well, what will make Ken happiest? As opposed to what will make the most compelling story.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
Sometimes you're going to watch the movie and go, Macbeth, what are you doing? Cut it out.
Exactly.
This is not going to end well, my friend.
Exactly. I felt a lot of that recently as I've been watching Game of Thrones. You got that first season and you're just watching Ned Stark going, you're not playing this game very well. Yeah. You're being far too honorable, sir. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. And there are then two things related to Trek then I wanted to bring this into. Is that my opinion last week about Spock having the dyslexia, basically, right. The Vulcan dyslexia, was it's not about they've changed the character. Because everything they've done so far has changed the character. And there's more of that in this one. So that's not my point. I'm not worried that oh my gosh, they've completely and utterly changed. For me, it was more of a point of you gave him a disease that goes counterpoint to everything that he did in the original series.
It'd be
More so.
like, giving young Kirk some kind of like fear of open spaces.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You got it. You got it. But with that said, part of what makes this episode so great is the nostalgia of like, oh, we're going back to Talos again. We're revisiting the Pike and Vina thing in a way that we hadn't before. I think that's kind of one of the explorations we hit in this episode. So I think, nostalgia, if used right, is great. But trying to put your own nostalgia onto something that's trying to move forward, which, again, Last Jedi, I feel like is, Discovery is, it's trying to move forward. It's trying to be, yes, it's different from these Trek but that's because it's doing something else. You could also politically say that we're trying to do that with the country, too, and some people in the political offices are not.
Yeah, you can't tell the same story over and over again without people being like, and myself. I mean, I don't want to watch, as I'm sure I talked about in the episode where they find out that Culber is the monster.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I find a lot of similarities between that episode and Something in the Dark. What's in the dark?
The
Diamond
Horta?
in the Dark? Yeah, it's the episode of the Horta. What's the name of the episode? Something in the Dark.
Demon in the Dark?
Danger in the Dark? I don't remember. Anyway, the one with the Horta.
Yeah.
The premise of the episode is that the thing that you thought was a monster isn't a monster, right? It's actually a noble creature just doing normal things, trying to protect itself, trying to, and then in a sense, you're the monster, whether you're the miners or you're the little spore creatures. So I find it very, very similar, right? But it's not the same story.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same set of values, and I think these are core Star Trek values, right? That there are no monsters, and Kirk says this a number of times. It's the what we don't know that we fear. And so there's no problem with me watching a Star Trek episode where it turns out the monster isn't a monster, it's something else. But that story needs to be, it can't be like we visit a mining colony and it turns out that the monster's not a monster. Instead, you almost kind of have to not see it coming, right?
Right.
You have to go, oh, they're doing this thing, and they're going to have to confront some creature. And of course, we also see creatures that turn out to just be creatures, like the Magatu, right? Yeah. We don't find out that the Magatu is an intelligent being who, just longs, to read philosophy by firelight. No, he's a poisonous beast, and he attacks Kirk. In that sense, he's a plot, right? He gets Kirk to be with what's her name, so that she can do her magic on him. In this case, the monster not being the monster was the point of the story, as well as doing other things like reintroducing Culber and, creating this conflict between May, who has worked how many episodes now to get Tilly involved in her little quest, only to turn around and be like, oh, yeah, we can't do that quest because it turns out that's Culber.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to have to explain to you why, we're not on board with this at all. And yet get your cooperation because it turns out we need you to help Culber, of all people, get back.
Yeah.
Right? So there was all kinds of cool stuff going on in that episode, but it wasn't Devil in the Dark. It wasn't Devil in the Dark. Now, notice how when I'm not thinking about it, boom, it's right there.
Yeah, exactly. Boom.
So that's what you want to do with these kinds of making the old thing new again, right? You need to have a twist. You can't just, go over the same ground in the same way, in that old familiar way. You want to hit some nostalgic notes, but you want to introduce new problems. You want to put a twist on how we're solving some of these problems. Right. So a lot of what was going on was very familiar, right? Especially having watched the Menagerie. Because, for example, those data tapes that we're watching, Kirk calls it out. He lampshades it right away. No ship keeps records this, accurate. Spock, what are we watching? I can't tell you just yet. Okay, well, I don't think we should go on because we don't know what the source of this is. And then it's Christopher Pike who says, no, this is accurate. I vouch for this. Yep. Right? This is what happened. Okay, well, if Pike says it's good, we'll keep watching.
Yeah.
Although I want to make a note in the record that This is really unusual. So the idea that they're projecting to ships, out in the distance, oh, we have been here before, but they're using it in a new and interesting way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought it was all exactly what you want when we visit someplace new. It's not, oh yeah, done this, been here, okay, thank you. Instead, it was new, it was interesting. I'm repeating myself.
No, that's all right. No, I mean, you hit the nails on the head. It's like if we're going to take something that we know is nostalgic and move it forward. You know what I mean? Which I feel like is all Discovery's been trying to do. All the naysayers of Discovery, that's their problem. It's like, this isn't Star Trek. It's like, okay, whatever. And it is, as you were just pointing out, it's the same thing with Star Wars and everything else that's been going on. It's like, no, we're trying to go this way and you're trying to pull us back this way. You're not helping. With that said, let's go ahead and talk about Vina here, because she's a very important part of not only this episode, but the original Cage episode. We find, as I was saying, a closeness between them that I'm not sure was on screen during the Cage. Maybe you can disagree with me. Maybe my memory is wrong. But they certainly seem a lot closer in this episode than they were in previous episodes. And maybe this is because over time, Pike has had time to think about, what happened on the planet. Obviously, she's got a closeness to him that he doesn't understand, even because, the Talosians gave him one, or gave her one. But there certainly seems to be a closeness, a love almost between these two that, again, I don't feel like existed necessarily in the original. It felt more in that original like he kept trying to push her away. Like, no, I got to get out of here, and you're not letting me do that.
So I think what they're doing with Vina, right, is we know where things end up, right? That the place that Spock is going to bring Pike is going to be Talos, not just so that he can walk around again, regain his physicality, right?
Right.
Because as we know from the Menagerie, he's trapped, a fully functioning mental person in this body that is so lifeless, all he can do is say yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to give him back his physicality, but he's also, we see him in that last moment who walks up the ramp with Vina. They're going to be together.
Yeah.
Right? And so while he may not have been on board with, hey, I'm going to just forget my ship and hang out here with Vina while he was in the cage, in part because his number one priority was getting out of the cage. I mean, I think there was a kind of interest in Vina, right? And we see what happens when the Talosians decide to bring down number one and the little redheaded lieutenant. And so, because they're commenting, right? Well, let's see if he's interested in the youth and vitality of the younger woman, or the strength of number one. So we know where this is going. He ends up with Vina, right? So in a sense, what they need to do is get us to see why that becomes Spock's go-to choice. I'm killing two birds with one stone. I'm giving Pike his physicality back. I'm bringing him back to Vina. This is how he should live out his retirement.
Yeah. It's kind of like a prequel almost to the Menagerie.
I also was thinking as I was watching the Menagerie that, so last week I talked about how I didn't really think that Pike's aggressive way of being, jumping in with Burnham in that, riding the craft or whatever, and then doing this mission with Tyler, was just him being like, I didn't get in the war, I got to prove myself. He's always this way, right? And of course, last episode I mentioned what happened on Rigel, because I had watched The Cage by that point. Yeah. But now, having watched Menagerie, he did it. That's how he ends up in the chair, right? There's some kind of delta radiation, and he throws caution to the wind. He rushes into danger. He saves the cadets, and he ends up exposing himself to lethal radiation because he just keeps going back in, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's part of Pike's character that he disregards danger, that he's basically a Kirk, because of course you listen to what Kirk has to say about Pike, and it's kind of like, oh, that's some bad luck, right? Like, because of course that's what you do. You rush into the danger. You run toward the sound of the guns. So that's just how a good captain behaves. and it's unfortunate that you paid the price of the way we live as starship captains.
Yes, absolutely. So when you couldn't hear me, what I said was it's almost a prequel to the Menagerie, this episode.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's really, because I have that note later too, is that it fills in the blanks of like some of those things. If you're like, oh, well, no wonder why he would go back to Talos then, much like what you were just saying. I love before we finish our talk about Vina here, not that might not come up again later, but I did want to say this, is that we've discussed in previous episodes about how much the some of the current cast looks like the people they were portraying.
Right.
Amanda looks like Jane Wyatt, and Pike looks like Pike. There's even that shot at the beginning when they go from the previously on where it's Pike to Pike, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's great, that looks great. But I didn't think that Vina looked anything like Vina.
No,
it was so weird.
Didn't.
I was thinking like, maybe even if they would have given her like the cropped hair that she had, that the original Vina had, that might have helped. But I just didn't feel like there was a closeness to them at all.
Yeah, I don't feel like they were even going for it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they thought, yeah, we're not gonna. And maybe it was because they tried and they're like, oh, that doesn't look good. You look like you either look silly in this outfit or you look like so dated, so like inappropriate to whatever reason it was. They just decided not to go that way because they obviously didn't.
Yeah. So I just thought that was like a kind of a missed opportunity, but it was what it was. Because even like when they like messed her up, although I thought the makeup itself was actually better. She didn't have quite like the slumped hump, that she had in the other one. You're like, all right, well, that's too bad. It was funny too that they also showed Spock's smile when he saw they were like, so this is it. This is part of canon, because even part of our canon, it was a thing that happened. Which of course is funny because it plays back at the end too when we see Spock smile yet again.
I'd seen that in the previews, right? And in one sense, it's funny, right? It's of course a reference to that other classic TV show, not just Star Trek or I Love Lucy, which is so important in Star Trek lore, but the Burns and Allen show, right? Good night, Gracie. Say good night, Gracie. Good night, Gracie. And I don't know why my voice goes down when I do Gracie.
Yeah, Gracie.
She had a really high, squeaky voice. But so Spock does that. Say goodnight, Spock. Say goodbye, Spock. Goodbye, Spock. And to have that done by the Talosians as a way of messing with the heads of Section 31, rather than something Spock really did, I thought was like the best of both worlds. We get the funny moment in which Spock says something like being overly literal. But on the other hand, it didn't really happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but there still was the smile though when he met Pike. Remember when because Pike even says. But yeah, that was a funny moment there with the Gracie and the Burns and Allen thing. So anyway, did you notice that as they were getting closer to Talos 4, that Spock was actually getting better?
Yes.
So it was interesting that like I wondered if the Talosians were already, starting to help him out. But then I wondered, well, then why put the defense up? You know what I mean? If they were like, if they knew Spock was coming and they knew why he was coming, then why throw the black hole, thing going? The material deception.
She'd also given him a hypo spray.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of attributed his getting better to being like, well, the hypo's taking effect.
Yeah. I guess that would make more sense and certainly answer my problem. So Burnham goes out to check, see what's out there because she doesn't know what's on Talos at all. And we have the humming music playing in the background, like the piano. And as we get closer,
and she sees the plant,
right, and smiles when she touches it. I love that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she sees Vina going into the shuttlecraft. She goes back down there. Yeah. She says that she's a friend of Spock and a friend of Captain Pike. She's like, in some ways, Captain Pike never left, she says.
Well, because I'm getting the illusion that the Talosians, not the illusion, I'm getting the allusion with an A, not illusion with an I.
Or delusion with a D.
The Talosians have gotten me too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I'm getting the illusion that the Telosians gave Bina the image that Pike never left.
Mm-hmm.
That she's living with Pike, and like, so this is just the real Pike, but like she's got her Pike, like, who's basically making a picnic lunch so they can go out to that range and
Exactly.
ride horses up in that parkland.
In where was it? Ruidoso or somewhere?
Someplace in
New Mexico.
Yeah. Someplace in, I thought California. Yeah, New Mexico, someplace.
Yeah, somewhere out west. Anyway.
Southwest.
Yep. So we learn what's been wrong with Spock because of what's happened with the Red Angel. His time is not linear in his brain anymore. It's not a linear construct. It's a fluid construct, and that sort of is what's messed up Spock's mind, because it was one of his what did he call it at the end? One of his like establishing thing. He lost logic, he lost time, and then he lost his emotions, he says at the end. So this was one of his like foundations. That was the word I was looking for. And once he lost that, that was it. He was done. So confused. So at this point, too, they asked to see the conflict between Burnham and Spock, and I thought, well, this is appropriate because this is something the Telosians would do, right? I mean, this is exactly what they were doing in the cage. You know, they wanted to keep Pike around because they wanted him to have real experiences and learn. They didn't know how to write stories or, you know, entertain themselves, so they wanted to keep Pike around for that reason, and they want to use Burnham and Spock here for basically the same thing. Although this then does beg the question of why they ultimately help Spock and Burnham and don't just be like, well, you're stuck here now. Sorry, you must entertain us for the next 50 years. It's almost like, why let them go?
I think they probably realized, one, that, like, you can't, because they're just going to, like, how long did it take interacting with Burnham before you're like, yeah, she's not going to submit? And the whole reason Spock is here, because he like broke out of a Starbase mentalist, he's not going to stay put either, right? And those Telosians are like, and he's going to fix let these two go, because otherwise they're going to blow the place up. But we will make them. We will get a story out of them.
Yeah,
maybe two. They get two stories, right? They get the story of Spock's escape, and they get the story of
the breakup.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I mean, they also, technically, they got a third story because they got Spock going, you know, seeing from the Red Angel what happens to the future, which is that these cephalopods, as Tilly calls them, you know, we see them going in and taking out Earth, taking out Vulcan, and taking out apparently the Andorians, wherever the Andorians are from.
Andor.
Andor. Well, of course, I could have made that up. So yeah, that's what he's been holding in his brain this whole time. That's what's been pushing us. So we know that somehow the Red Angel is from this weird future where all humanity, intelligent life apparently, has been wiped out, and he's coming back to try and save the galaxy and save all intelligent life. And
it could still be Picard.
He could still be Picard. Yay! My thoughts are still on.
We just didn't realize that the Picard show was going to be a dystopian. Like Picard's alone.
Right, exactly. So we see how the Red Angel told Spock where young Burnham was. We heard about that, but in this episode we actually saw it. But this begs yet another question, which is, why does the Red Angel save Burnham? There's the real question for you, a real thinker. Because obviously he feels that Burnham's got something to do with saving all of humanity. Or maybe it had to be Burnham who saved Spock. It had to be Burnham to take him here to Talos and save the world. And those cephalopods from the future, they look just like the one that attacked the ship too. That was made from the probe. So that's an interesting continuation of that.
And we did get some nice, shots over to, and I forget her name now, the robot person who's been hacked.
Yes, Arium.
Yeah. I mean, so obviously Arium is under the control whatever, right? The bad people robot monsters.
Yes, whatever they are. So we finally see this moment where the breakup, for lack of a better word, happens between Burnham and Spock, and it's sad. Ugh. Spock is trying to get her to stay. He says, "You are helping me come to terms with my human side." Ugh. To continue to dissuade him, she says, "That part of you is so small anyway, you might as well ignore it. It doesn't matter." And then, even more sad, he says, "I love you. Kill me." She says back, "You don't know how to love." And then, much like Kirk, who's gone against Spock a few times to try and convince him, like the end of This Side is Paradise, calls him a half-breed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's like, if you watch the stuff, that's going to hurt him, right? Because we've seen it happen in the past.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And then and the fact that Kirk then uses it was like even more of a punch to the gut.
Yep.
But I do now have one question, a possible plot hole, maybe something that will be saved, or maybe you have a better answer for me. But she does get brought back to the house. Like, if this would have happened later in their life, maybe it would have, caused a different thing to happen. But because she's so young, she goes back to the house. She's there at least another 5-6 years. Like, why doesn't she repair this relationship?
Right.
It would have been a lot easier to be like, look, I was just saying that because I was worried about the logic extremists coming after you and blah, blah, blah. So you have to, make yourself be tough or whatever,
Spock says that. He says you were trying to protect me because of the whatever. And
yeah, the terrorists.
You're young Spock, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, no, it's because you're totally a goofball. Although she doesn't call him a goofball.
She calls him weird. She calls him a weird half-breed is what she calls him. All this, of course, does lead to a bit of a catharsis for the two of them, right? While they haven't officially made up or anything, they certainly seem to be at a better place than they were at the beginning of this episode. I was thinking this would also be a good title for this episode, would it be Catharsis?
Yeah,
you got Culber and Tyler, Vina and Pike, all of these cathartic things happening for all these people who need to work it out. Spock at the end. Spock thanks Burnham by saying his humanity could have been a damage to him. And she says, no, your humanity was beautiful. Aw, it's great. It's about all I got written for the at least that part for Burnham and Spock. Anything else about that storyline you wanted to hit before we move on to some of the other parts of this episode?
No, just, let's proceed. And if I think,
if something comes up, let me know. All right. So earlier in the episode, Pike asks about Tyler and Burnham's relationships, which Tyler mostly admits to. He says, I had feelings for her. I think she had feelings for me, but things got crazy when Voke came along. In a later scene, Pike and Tyler discuss, basically Tyler in Section 31. Tyler basically tells him to just trust whatever Burnham's gonna do. She's gonna find the right way to do these things, and he says
that was the winning argument.
Yeah,
it's the thing. It's the one thing they have in common, right?
Right.
Is Burnham. They both think Burnham is a good officer, knows what she's doing.
Well, if you trust Burnham more than Section 31, then why are you with them? And he says, after what I've become, I can be of service there. I can be of service there. Bum, bum, bum. Doesn't really answer the question, though.
Right.
Saru tells Pike then about some unauthorized burst that was sent from the array. Then suddenly the spore drive goes down. A couple of other weird things started happening. Obviously, this is Arian behind this, of course, but she's been using Tyler's command codes. Dun, dun, dun. So, of course, then Pike basically sends him down to the brig. So he is not around to help out anymore when Section 31 comes a-calling. I love the Section 31 stuff that happened in this. Again, just, Pike and Leland with each other, dealing with each other. The misdirect at the end of Tyler and Spock, not Tyler, Burnham and Spock down on the planet, but actually taking the shuttlecraft and ending up on the Section 31. That's great. It's funny, though, because I really feel like, and I've said this before and will continue to say it, that it really feels like Captain Georgiou is using all of her political deftness that she in the Mirror Universe to make her way up Section 31.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
it's
at the end of
quite disturbing.
It is kind of disturbing, yeah. It's funny, even at the end of this, like after the switch happens, she's like, oh yeah, they did this swap to me in the other universe, so I bombed the planet and they're singing plants to oblivion. You're like, geez, she's really cutthroat. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
Speaking of Tyler, we also get the catharsis here for Culber when he sees Tyler early on, and then later confronts him, and they start to have a fight. Dun, 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 dun. And Saru just basically like, nope, we got to let this happen. To which afterward, Pike was like, I don't know if that was the correct way to handle that. Certainly isn't following the guidelines. And then Saru's like, well, show me in the guidelines where we can deal with a person who's come back to life and someone who's got like half their body grafted on from Klingons.
Yeah.
And Pike is basically like, well, hey, then Pike is like, I have a feeling that you would have made a different decision before your own metamorphosis happened. Let's just not handle anything like this again. All right, I'm giving this one a pass. I love that. But now talking about Stamets and Culber, obviously they're both having a bad time of it. Culber specifically. I really like what they did with him in this episode. I feel like the way he was sort of describing what he was going through really pulled me into what was happening to him. I could almost like feel it.
Right.
You know, it's like he eats the food. He says he has memory of it, but it doesn't connect to anything. And then what a weird feeling that must be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, during their fight, poor Stamets is like, well, why are you mad at me? And Culber says, I don't even know. It's perfect.
Well, and he does know you keep making me want to feel things.
Yeah, that I don't feel.
Right. And so that's kind of awkward.
You make me want to love this food that I used to eat. I can't love this food. I can't love you. It's like I'm not that version of me anymore is basically how it ends up.
Yeah. Which is kind of it's a sad, like we've rescued you and now it turns out you're not the person we thought we were rescuing. You just look like him.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a little more than that, but yeah. I honestly, it seems like it's a physical thing that's happening to him more than like a mental thing. Because he says go ahead.
I feel like it's both.
Yeah, maybe. But it really feels like, because you know, she says a couple episodes ago, the doctor says to him like, you know, you're just getting used to your new nervous system. Your new nervous system is getting used to being you. It's like, you know what I mean? So everything is sort of like, it's like, it just doesn't have the same attachment to nostalgia, you know? It doesn't have the same attachment to, oh, yeah, I used to love spaghetti, but now it's like, this is just spaghetti now, you know? Everything he's seeing sort of has a darker edge to it. You know, there's that earlier scene when they're walking around and he's like, oh, this probably looks pretty familiar. He's like, more or less, you know? So we have the big fight between Culber and Tyler, and Culber says to him, I don't know who I am anymore. And Tyler's like, who do you think you're talking to? It's like this great little thing of like, okay, they're kind of going through the same thing in a very different way. But at the core, it's kind of the same thing. I don't know who I am anymore after this big change to my, you know, this big evolution almost. To which then Culber, you know, says like, hey, why don't you, or Stamets basically says, hey, why don't you come back home with me? And Culber's like, it doesn't feel like home anymore. Please move forward because I have to too. He just has to get used to everything, you know, give him some space. We also get a little disobedience at the end from Captain Pike, right? Who's decided like to do what Spock says and run. He's like, lads, we got to get out of here. And, you know, at first he's like, all right, crew, I just want to let you know that if anybody, and right away Detmer's like, what course heading, sir? Until he's like, yeah, I really think we should get out of here, like now.
Yeah.
So that's fun. So we're gonna have them on the run for the next couple episodes, I'm sure. And from the trailer for next week, we also looks like Arium finally comes to a head, and we get that part of the storyline taken care of. It looks like this may be also why we're not allowed to have robots on the ship anymore until Data.
I can totally see why that would be a problem.
Yes, exactly.
And just watching this episode, this is not a things working out for the best. This is it's a vulnerability.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. All of that to say, the writing on this episode was like spot on. It was so good. The scene with Stamets and Culber was really good. All of the Spock stuff was amazing. The writing, especially in this episode, was so great. I haven't quoted so much of the episode since we were doing the old recaps back in the day. All right, a couple of quick review stuff. Things I thought were interesting. On IGN, they gave it a 9. All right. He says he wraps up his review by saying, with If Memory Serves, Star Trek Discovery walks a tightrope, providing a modern piece of television in line with what the show itself is and what current audiences expect, while also connecting directly to one of the most famous recognizable episodes of Star Trek from over 50 years ago. That it does it so successfully and entertainingly is almost too good to be true. I was like, all right, that's a nice little recap on this episode. I agree with it 100%. Now, with that said, one of Discovery's cheerleaders, who we've been reading reviews of on Den of Geek, is Katie Burt, but she gave this episode only 2 out of 5 stars. Here was part of her problem with it. She said, one of the most refreshing aspects of the Star Trek universe, is its general aversion to the chosen one narrative. In a culture increasingly overrun by the idea that one person should or could have the power to shape the world, Star Trek has always given us a more nuanced, realistic, and collective model of how utopia might come back and stick around. She continues by saying, if memory serves, and much of the Spock-centric Season 2 storytelling, unfortunately bucks this 50-year tradition to offer a chosen one-esque story of Spock, one that Burnham, the supposed main character of the show, must contort to fit into. Thought that was a very interesting but different take on how she saw this episode.
Yeah, so I think it really comes down to is this just is this really the work of the Red Angel? And Spock isn't the chosen one. Spock is just involved, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and Burnham too. I mean, we don't know. Obviously, the Red Angel saved Burnham for a reason, so she's still got a bigger part of the story.
Yeah. So there's that kind of stuff, and it doesn't feel Star Trek-y. So, like in my whole list of, when I used to teach, 18th century stuff, I would do this romanticism is, and the Enlightenment is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would talk about all the ways they're different in their values, and I would show, landscape pictures from the middle of the 18th century and landscape pictures from the early 19th century, right? And landscape pictures in the 18th century were bright and sunny, and landscape pictures in the early 19th century often had a storm in them, or like, a ship being tossed on the waves. And this is, of course, the beautiful versus the sublime. But one of the differences that I would talk about is that Star Trek is an Enlightenment document, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the differences is that when you get into trouble, there are people to call on. There's an organization, Starfleet. There's the Federation, right? You're not by yourself. Whereas in Star Wars, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope.
Right.
There's one person who can, save this situation. And they're probably kind of magical. And so, yeah, you don't want to give that up in Star Trek. I would agree. I don't feel like watching it that, they've gone for the chosen one narrative. I think now that she's pointed it out, I see it. But, it wasn't something that I was like, what are they doing? This isn't Star Trek. Up until this moment, so.
Well, and again, too, we've got the whole second half of the season basically for, the rest of the story to unfold, 6 more
Right.
episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything could happen. And again,
And
as we
probably will.
and probably will. So on Trekcore, which I've really started enjoying their reviews of the show because, of course, they deep dive. They're like, we're Trekcore. We're going to deep dive into some of this stuff. So I have a couple of different quotes from him, but here's one. Discovery appears to be sketching out a broader arc for the Spock character that ties into classic Trek. Rejected by Burnham as a child, Spock eschewed his human side. His later relationship with Kirk and McCoy, therefore, and the assistance they give him in becoming more comfortable and accepting his human heritage becomes even more meaningful. Kirk helps to fix Burnham's mistake, or at least that's how it looks at this point.
I totally feel that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you even said something similar last week, but I was like, oh, this too is perfectly articulated. Let's see. Here's another one. Okay, I've said similar things, but obviously this episode helps bring it around and he does it again more beautifully than I could, partially because it's written and I'm just talking off the top of my head. He writes, "The Pike of the Cage was at such a different place in his life, and had a bit of a different personality. That, as much as I have been absolutely loving Ensign Mount's Pike, it just didn't feel like the same character. However, this episode does a lot to wipe that away, as from the very first shot, we see Pike brooding from his experiences on Talos 4, and when Vina appears to him, we see the complicated emotion that Hunter's Pike displayed in the cage: love, lust, anger, confusion. Even though Pike was largely ancillary to the events of this episode, he was still important for his character in helping us see the character's evolution from the Enterprise's first encounter with Talos 4 3 years prior." So I thought that was really cool. I was like, yep, nope, that's exactly what I've been saying, and I agree with him. This episode helped turn it around. He's been purposely putting on a different face.
Well, he's also got like a particular mission in this. He's got a crew that was, where their captain had betrayed them, right?
Uh-huh.
And so on the one hand, he's got this Red Angel mission. On the other hand, he's got to take a crew that had been betrayed by their captain and kind of work with them and get them to believe. And I think he was into that mission, right? So that was that was something he could do.
Yeah.
He was good at that stuff.
Okay. The last thing he writes, which is brilliant, was, "Viewers are entirely free to quibble with any aspect of this show and the story being told. But I think that there's one thing that we cannot dispute after this episode. This entire production, from the writer's staff to the production crew, demonstrate their love for Star Trek, and they honor the franchise's history. After all, we wouldn't be back at Talos 4 if we didn't." Or if they didn't.
Right, yeah.
I thought that was great. Well, that's it. That's all the notes I got on this episode. Again, anything else we didn't hit? Anything else you want to mention?
Nope, I think we're good.
I think we're good, too. Lots of fun stuff in this episode. This was such a good episode. This is probably, so far for me, the highlight of this season. It was super good. Dealt with a lot of, very complicated emotions almost, but in such a way that was like, okay, yep, nope, I'm buying all of this. I love it. And obviously the return to Talos was just like the butter on top. Cream, the whipped cream on the hot chocolate.
There's a lot of fun when they go back to Jabba the Hutt's palace and Tatooine. We get cute comments like, I was born here, you're gonna die here.
Yeah.
Coming back to Tatooine had a lot of that fun to it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's fun it is fun to go back.
Yeah, it was great.
Audience, we know where we're at, or we feel like we have a guidepost. We're not lost. We're not like, where are we? I've never heard of this place before. Yeah. Everyone else seems to know where we're at but me, which is typical of how these things work.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I wonder how many viewers, had no idea what the cage was and were, sort of thrown off by it.
But we had that great last time on Star Trek.
That's also true. Well, at least we'll send them to go watch that episode, perhaps.
Yep.
After all, if they've got all access, they can watch it all they like. All right.
Actually,
well, that's it. This
I
week.
don't think it's on All Access.
Oh, really?
No, I think
Oh.
I had to buy it on Amazon.
Wow. I know it's on Netflix because that's where I watched it. Interesting. All right. Well, that wraps up another great episode of the Brothers Trek About. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We are currently on Stitcher Radio. We are currently on Apple Podcasts. We just found out, on Google Play. Isn't that exciting? Lots of other places you'll be able to find us soon, I promise. We're also on the YouTubes every once in a while when I can upload a video and it doesn't take 6 hours for it to upload. Then it'll be up there, and that'll be exciting too. Well, anyway, I'm Matt, coming to you from Austin, and coming from Planet Houston is my brother Ken. Say goodbye, Ken.
Say goodbye, Spock.
Nice. And we will see everybody next week. I almost feel like we should re-record that ending.